Hello viewers, let us discuss today the political economy of federalism. Federalism, we all know, is a method of dividing and distributing powers between the central government and the regional governments. All these governments enjoy a certain degree of coordination as well as independence. Now, in order to understand the political economy of federalism, we need to understand the nature of fiscal federalism in developed as well as developing federal nations. Now, before we move on with this topic, we need to understand that we look around the world and to various federal countries, we find that three major world events have shaken governance in the 21st century. The 2008 financial crisis in advanced European nations, which is popularly called the Great Economic Recession. Secondly, the increase in political polarization among political parties leading to the growth of the radical political parties or their breakdown. And the third is the COVID-19 pandemic. These three events have shaped the nature of redistributive role of the various federal governments. In fact, it has been observed that with the rise of various regional political parties, the regional electoral dynamics have changed, leading to a difference and a change in the nature of center-state relations. The COVID-19 pandemic had also put a daunting challenge on the redistributive role of the national and well as the provincial governments. Now, in this background, we need to understand that federalism and decentralization is often advanced as a popular method for ensuring better balanced economic division of powers between governments around the world. Now, though it is considered to be more economic, more efficient and more effective to have a federal form of government, yet the results are mixed. In fact, it has been found that federations in many countries have resulted in poor fiscal management, the reinforcement of centrifugal forces, or decreased accountability. So, though federalism is advanced for better redistributive role, yet the results are not always successful or great. Now, in order to understand how the political economy of federalism works, we basically need to start with certain broad principles of fiscal federalism. Firstly, federalism broadly considers the vertical structure of the public sector, fiscal policy and institutions, as well as the interdependence between the various fiscal institutions. Therefore, we need to first try to understand if in this vertical structure, what is the distribution of powers in terms of revenue and expenditure between the central and the state governments. The conventional starting point is that local governments hold more detailed information on the preferences as well as local needs of the citizenry. Therefore, they should have a more say in terms of imposition of taxes and collection of taxes and using the revenue accrued for the betterment of the delivery of goods and services to the citizens. In general, this suggests that the lowest possible level of government, that is the local government, should provide public goods and services and they should have fiscal autonomy. The second principle focuses on the fact that one needs to determine the strategy to finance a given level of goods and services. The starting point here is that the level of government that is responsible for the provision of a particular type of goods and service should also be responsible for funding and collecting of the revenue for that service. In this case, it is more likely that the provider of the goods and services bear the costs related to provision, and here you will find that if that be the case, the moral hazard related to it is also limited. Thus, tax instruments should be assigned so that each government can realistically collect sufficient amount of revenue to provide for basic goods and services to the citizens. In practice, different levels of government are rarely self-sufficient in terms of financing their legal and moral responsibilities. Thus, they are dependent on the next higher level of government. In the case that the local governments are dependent on the provincial governments and the provincial governments are dependent on the central government. Thirdly, one needs to determine the appropriate instruments and the degree to which equalized disparities in fiscal resources can be availed. In other words, we need to understand how to balance the imbalances in terms of horizontal and vertical imbalances happening within a federal system, because we need to understand that all the provinces, all the states are never federally or fiscally equal, in the sense that all do not have equal access to resources. This results in various kinds of imbalances. Here, the central government has to step in order to minimize these inequalities within the provinces and bring about better redistribution of resources. In most federal countries, there exists vertical transfers in which there are transfers from different levels of government, as well as horizontal transfers in which transfers happen at the same level of government. Now, what is the purpose of the vertical and horizontal transfers? The purpose of both these transfers is to balance any anomaly in terms of economic redistribution of resources. The differences between revenue and expenditure are called vertical and horizontal imbalances. More popularly, we call them fiscal gaps. The next important principle in understanding fiscal federalism is the extent to which the federal and the vertical design does not impose fiscal discipline to an adequate degree. That means we need to adopt adequate strategies in order to minimize the fiscal gap. Otherwise, what happens is that some states become more progressed and advanced and other states become highly backward when it comes to providing of goods and resources. But the purpose of a federation is to minimize regional inequalities within the country as a whole. The logic of this entire form of fiscal redistribution is to avoid fiscal free riding as well as moral hazard. Now, it should also be noted that in many respects, the allocation of responsibilities and instruments to different levels of government is never clear-cut. Though the constitution of the respective federal countries provide for different forms of distribution of powers between the central and the regional governments as well as the local governments, many a times their distribution is vague and indefinite, leading to gaps in fiscal redistribution of powers. For example, many government responsibilities are either shared between the federal and the state governments, and many are coordinated between the state and the local governments. Now, all these goods and services and the distribution would automatically depend on a proper fiscal distribution of powers. Now, there are certain theories to understand how this fiscal federalism works in practice. The first theory is called the fiscal equivalency theory. The principle of fiscal equivalency requires a separate federal jurisdiction for each public service, which means that every public service which have a requisite amount of persons who would be delivering the service, as well as a separate expenditure and revenue to be set aside for that service. Wallace Oates proposed a related idea which he calls the correspondence principle. According to this principle, the jurisdiction determining the order of provision of each public good, which can be education, health, etc., should include the set of individuals that consume it. This generally means that there would be a large amount of overlapping jurisdiction, because certain services may overlap in terms of national and regional boundaries, example health as well as education. The second principle, apart from the fiscal equivalency principle, is the decentralization theorem. According to the decentralization theorem advanced by Oates, each public service should be provided by the jurisdiction having control over the minimum geographic area that would internalize the benefits and the cost of such provision, which means that under the general prediction, a higher degree of spillovers may reduce the differences in the utility of centralization and decentralization, which means that different public goods and services should be offered through a more measured decentralization method. More the decentralization, better delivery of services in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. The third theory is the subsidiarity theory, which provides that functions should be performed at the lowest level of government. This principle also implies implicitly, if not explicitly, a hierarchical system, so much so that the center would give direction to the provinces and the provinces would give direction to the local governments for the efficient delivery of services. One of the best examples of this system can be the implementation of the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act in India, which is highly decentralized and the entire delivery of service is done at the local level by the Gram Panchayats. The deeper question that arises in this entire system of delivery of goods and services is who will decide? For whom? In terms of who is the authority to give these goods and services, and number two, who are the beneficiaries? Do the beneficiaries comprise the entire population? Do they comprise only the BPL category, or do they comprise a specific set of consumers in the country? So this is decided by the government at the different levels regarding the beneficiaries targeted for a distributive role of service. Now, let us try to understand how federalism operates in this entire scheme of vertical and horizontal transfers. The economic theory of federalism has become the starting point for many such scholarly and policy-oriented discussions around the world, where they believe that if federalism has to be a successful model of government, fiscal discipline is of utmost necessity. The goal is to correct market failures through government intervention, and the guiding principle is that policy responsibility should be given to the smallest level of government, which we call it micro-decentralization. The economics of federalism views the fact that the primary task of government is to solve the failures of private markets and to satisfy the demands of citizens for goods and services. So decentralization steps in to solve certain market failures. Examples include all goods where sharing a fixed resource is efficient, as with the theory of public goods forwarded by Paul Samuelson, or where one person's actions generates external benefits or imposes cost on other. So the type of services to be delivered depends on the benefit as well as the costs incurred in providing them. Now we need to understand that what is needed in both these cases, benefit as well as cost, discover citizens' willingness to pay for these services, because each publicly provided good and service should have a certain cost factor, and the question is who is going to pay for the cost incurred in providing certain beneficiary services, the government wholly or the private citizens wholly, or there should be certain principles of subsidization of products. The economic task of federalism is a means to provide a solution to this entire system of provision of goods and services. Like local services, education, fire, protection, law and order, trade pickup, sanitation, street cleaning, etc., these are all to be provided by the local service providers or local governments, because they are the best means to readily provide these services at minimum cost. However, for goods and services where a large amount of population is concerned and where the externalities are substantial, it is emphasized that there should be a centralized governmental system of providing goods and services. So one thing is clear in this entire economic system of federalism, that goods and services which directly affect citizens at a local level should be provided by the local government, and goods and services which affect a substantial body of citizens should be centralized by the central or the national government. Now, within a particular country, candidate services might be higher education and research, national defense, courts and jails, protecting property, market competition, ensuring proper air and water quality, national highways, airports, railways. The list is unending. Now, where the concerns are national in nature, say construction and maintenance of airports or maintenance of railways and water bodies, the entire task of funding and maintaining them should go with the national government. On the other hand, police, law and order, which concerns a particular area, should remain within the concern of the provincial government. However, certain local services like sanitation, clearance of markets and such local services should remain with the local governments. From the perspective of economic efficiency, determining which level of government is best suited to manage government functions depends on the political structure as well as the resources available for funding those services. Now, we need to understand that this entire system of fiscal federalism entails a process of federalization, which refers to more and more division and distribution of powers. Now, we need to understand that this process of federalization entails a number of principles. The first principle speaks about the partition decision. How are you going to partition the national citizenry into state level citizens and local level citizens? Who is going to provide what to these citizens? Secondly, a national government may be established with the help of elected representatives, as in the case of a parliamentary form of government. Now, we need to understand how do these representatives represent their locality or their constituency. So, it is imperative to understand that federations may have a parliamentary form of government, they may also have a presidential form of government. Now, you need to understand that a parliamentary form of government works differently because there the national legislature which will have representatives from the different states and constituencies, and these representatives will try to garner resources for their constituencies. On the other hand, in the presidential system of government, it is the chief executive who drafts policy measures for the entire country, and the provinces have their own respective legislatures to carry out developmental functions. So, in presidential federations, we find that there is a system of separation of powers coupled with checks and balances to ensure that there is proper distribution of financial resources. Now, a very important aspect of fiscal federalism is interjurisdictional efficiency and intra-jurisdiction efficiency. Now, we need to understand the jurisdiction of the central as well as the national government when it comes to division of resources, expenditure, revenue, etc. Let us start with this concept of interjurisdictional efficiency and federalism. Now, in a federal system, it is very important to understand what is the jurisdiction of a particular government. Interjurisdictional efficiency involves the appropriate allocation of individuals and other resources among the different jurisdictions. Interjurisdictional efficiency is achieved when the public activities of the interacting governments satisfy the collective demands of the individuals at a minimum cost. The cost of public provision includes the cost of producing public services plus the transaction cost of these services. Now, let's come to intra-jurisdictional efficiency. Intrajurisdictional efficiency requires a choice of public activities which satisfies the collective demand within a given jurisdiction, measured as the willingness to pay for all those activities for the individuals within the jurisdiction. So, intra-jurisdictional efficiency concerns a particular state or a province or a locality. Interjurisdictional efficiency refers to jurisdiction across states and provinces. Now, in federal systems, interjurisdictional inefficiencies arise when the decisions and actions of individuals within one jurisdiction have an effect on individuals located in another jurisdiction that are not accurately reflected in the marketplace. This is highly complex and differs from different levels of federation. Interjurisdictional inefficiencies arise also when the political process generates outcome within a jurisdiction which do not maximize the well-being of all citizens. Therefore, we find that interjurisdictional inefficiency arises because of the inefficiency of the political process, or when the political system is unable to meet the demands of the individuals located at the different provinces. Let us now come to the Tybalt model, which is considered to be extremely important in understanding the political economy of federalism. The Tybalt model, as proposed by Charles Tybalt, is a description of fiscal competition between various local governments. The important constitutional decision that defines the Tybalt economy is the partition decision that divides the national population into many political jurisdictions in such a way that each jurisdiction is a cost provider of public services within that boundary. The Tybalt model is formally analogous to the purely competitive market model with complete information. The assumption needed to ensure that the government competition is fully analogous to efficient private market competition, and we need to understand that the decentralized structure of strict federal systems may be economically inefficient. This is the basic assumption of the Tybalt model. If so, we must look at additional institutions. The Tybalt model focuses on the fact that intergovernmental bargaining and centralized government decision making might yield better performance in the public sector. Now, from the Tybalt perspective, the world of decentralized competitive governments will allow for a marketplace in which individuals move among local jurisdiction to select the public service combination that they most desire. So basically, public will move around the local jurisdiction in order to assess what goods and services would satisfy their aspirations and demands better. Just as a private marketplace creates an incentive for suppliers to produce their goods at a lowest cost and to provide the goods most desired by the consumers in the marketplace, so too with the pressure of household shopping through exit and relocation force competitive governments to be efficient in delivery of goods and services. Thus, it is believed that if the government operates on the same functioning as that of the market, the efficiency of government provision of goods and services will also increase. Now, there are 5 assumptions of this Tybalt economy. If these 5 assumptions are fulfilled, it is believed that the fiscal federalism will be highly balanced. The first assumption is that publicly provided goods, services and regulatory activities are provided at a minimum average cost, and the scale of population required to reach this minimum is a small share of the total population. Second, there is a perfectly elastic supply of local political jurisdiction, each capable of replicating all attractive economic features of the competitors. This ensures that there are a sufficient number of alternative locations for households to choose from. Thirdly, Mobility of households and businesses is costless. So people can easily move from one place to another place. Households and businesses are fully informed about the fiscal and regulatory policies of each jurisdiction. Fifth, there are no interjurisdictional externalities or spillovers. Let us now quickly try to understand how different forms of federal systems occur. We will take the example of presidential federations, cooperative federalism, and democratic federalism. It is believed that economic federalism represents in its best and strongest way in presidential systems of government. It is believed that presidential systems are usually associated with efficient governance. Now, in order to have efficient economic federal systems to operate, presidential federations must fulfill 5 conditions. First condition, open elections and voting for electing the president. Second, all candidates should have the equal abilities to deliver the promised policies. Third, voters are informed about their candidates and their preferences. Fourth, there is a policy commitment on the part of the presidential candidates. And fifth, majority rule elects the president among the 2 candidates. Now, it has been observed through a cross-country study that countries with presidential democracies tend to adopt more efficient public budgets and as a result enjoy high rate of economic growth than do parliamentary democracies. In the study of the US historical record, it has been shown that the economic successes of President Theodore Roosevelt, Frank Eisenhower, Johnson, and Reagan point to the fact that they were very strong presidents who brought in strong, economically efficient federal governance within their country. On the other hand, it has also been shown through a number of cross-country study that when you compare parliamentary federations with presidential federations, parliamentary federations are considered to be fiscally weak federations in comparison to presidential ones. But there is a lacuna in presidential federations where it is believed that ethnic minorities and different kinds of racial minorities may suffer from different kinds of exploitation, and that is the reason another form of federations is actually advanced, and we call it cooperative federalism, which operates on a basis of a proper balance between the center and the provincial governance. Cooperative federalism provides for a bargaining environment that encourages all local jurisdiction or subset of local jurisdiction to participate in the process of redistribution of goods and services. And we need to understand that there are no spillovers or externalities in the process of cooperative federalism because there is a pact or an agreement and understanding between the national and the state governments regarding the distribution of public goods and services. Now, coming to democratic federalism, like economic as well as cooperative federalism, begins with the partition decision of the Tybalt economy using many local governments for the provision of congestible public goods, but offers an institutionalized compromise of the representation decision between the economic and cooperative federalism. Democratic federalism, unlike presidential federalism, focuses more on higher decentralization of goods and services at the local level. So in democratic federalism, more powers and authority is given to the local governments to distribute goods and services to a large number of beneficiaries. Let us now come to the final part of the discussion. How do we choose the federal constitution? An apt federal constitution is one which clearly and aptly provides for a distribution of legislative, executive, as well as economic division of powers between the different levels of government. An ideal constitution is one which also clearly states the shaping and sharing of economic resources between the different levels of government. Questions such as raising of revenues, collection of various forms of taxes are clearly laid down in the Constitution to prevent any future confusion about collection of taxes. Finally, a constitution which adopts and adapts itself to the changing needs of financial requirements of the local as well as the national governments is considered to be the most efficient in handling interjurisdictional and intra-jurisdictional efficiencies. Let us try to conclude about what we have studied on the basis of the theorems, the principles, and the various forms of federations occurring in the world. Federalism entails a redistributive role of the central government and the political autonomy of the sub-central units. Now, in the case of a presidential federation, we found the existence of a strong political economy. In the case of cooperative federalism, we found that there was a system of protection of minorities at the provincial level wherein separate resources were earmarked for ethnic and racial minorities. In the case of democratic federalism, elected representatives joined the national legislature and represented their cause of the various constituencies and areas that they represented, ensuring that more resource flowed into their constituencies. The choice of an optimal federal constitution depends upon the relative importance one places upon the values of efficiency, economy, as well as ensuring better delivery of goods and services to the beneficiary. Thus, the nature and working of fiscal federalism varies from one country to another country, and it is also dependent on the political structure as well as the nature of governance in that particular federation. Thank you.